Keon Coleman, I think, has potential to be a high-level separator. He's not quite there yet. But one thing he's really good at, especially comparative to like Gabe Davis, who that's the role he might be taking on, is running through space, like deep crossers, drag routes. Like, if you ever watched Gabe Davis on a drag route, Joe, it's hilarious. He looks like a baby deer.
Bro, I'm not into Gabe Davis. like you want to talk about like resource allocation? 3 years, $39 million for Gabe Davis is insane to me. I can find any big-bodied guy with some ball skills down the field that doesn't run fast, has a limited route tree, gives you nothing in terms of yak, and can block well. That's not $13 million a year to me.
What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
I feel like the QB conversation went well last week. And so we have some wide receiver stuff to talk about. There's like 19 million wide receiver contracts pending, Joe. There's also some potential holdout situations, some disgruntled franchise tag players. And then we just coming off the heels of A.J. Brown and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Devontae Smith all just got paid. Michael Pittman Jr. So a lot to dive into with the receivers, Joe. Why don't we start with we have this list of guys that are coming up for contract, Justin Jefferson being the top guy probably. Why don't we start there?
Well, listen, it's a quarterback-driven league, but the media circus is driven by the wide receivers, man. Like, it's just a different breed, man. These guys, they get traded, they hold out. There is more drama surrounding wide receivers in the NFL than any other position, and it's not particularly close. I think that's why you see so much movement with them all the time. And like you mentioned, there's just so many guys right now that are, I guess, kind of holding out. I mean, it's voluntary OTAs, but based on some of the new rules within the NFL, you got to make a real calculated choice if you're actually going to hold out. So this is where guys kind of make their statements. And like you mentioned, probably the best receiver in the league in Justin Jefferson is one of those guys looking for a new deal, playing or scheduled to play this year on the 5th-year option. And I'm sure as Justin Jefferson sees the likes of A.J. Brown getting $32 million a season, Amon-Ra St. Brown getting a tick above $30 million a season, of course, Tyreek Hill at $30 million a season, Justin Jefferson probably wants his money, man. He probably wants that, I would guess, $35 million per season. I think that's where that contract is ultimately going to come in. And Minnesota, obviously a team that just drafted J.J. McCarthy in the first round. You love the supporting cast that they've been able to assemble around him with the Jefferson and the Jordan Addison, the T.J. Hawkinson, and now Aaron Jones in that backfield with a lot of good on the offensive line. I like their center and tackle situation. I feel like Justin Jefferson just like the piece of that makes you feel really good about what J.J. McCarthy is stepping into. I feel like it's only a matter of time before this gets done, but it's fascinating to consider just how high it's going to go. I'm thinking it's going to land somewhere around $35 million per.
Yeah, it feels that way. One thing we can talk about too here is like when it comes to a guy like Jefferson, no other than QB, the other two markets that have absolutely exploded over the last few years is wide receiver and defensive tackle. Wide receiver, actually, the market has grown faster than the QB market. If you look back to 2015 when Julio Jones signed what was at the time a massive contract extension, his cap percentage at signing was only like 9.5%. Now you're getting guys like Tyreek when he signed in 2021, he's at 14.5. That's 5% jump for one position. That's massive. Devonta Adams 13.5%, Cooper Kupp and AJ Brown right at 12.8 roughly. Amon-Ra, even though he has the second highest AAV, he came in at like 11.75%. Point being though, like these dudes are getting absolutely paid now. Like this is an expensive deal, and you got a team like the Eagles paying two of these guys and AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. It's a passing league, and I think the Vikings kind of have to do whatever it takes, right? What is the repercussions if they don't retain him are significantly higher than paying him, I feel like.
Well, you would trade him, right? That's what you would do. If you're not gonna pay him, you're gonna trade him. And I feel like while maybe we had this like slew of NFL player trades, whether it was Khalil Mack the first time he was traded, or Jalen Ramsey or Jamal Adams, that I think kind of put the player for picks trades into a different ballpark than maybe where they've come since, right? Where like Brian Burns is going for a 2, I feel like it's been different. But I think Justin Jefferson's in that stratosphere of player where you would expect 2 first-round picks to go back to Minnesota and maybe some change along with that.
Yeah, but like, is anyone doing that though?
Okay, if you're Buffalo,
It
what if
has
you're
to be a team like that, right?
Pittsburgh?
I don't know if I'm wasting 2 first-round picks to give Russell Wilson a guy. Like,
What if you're Denver?
that would make sense.
So, like, yeah, it's not a deep menu of teams, but, like, I think you ask yourself that same question for every reason you would say it makes sense for Denver, for every reason you would say it makes sense for Buffalo, it would make sense for Minnesota to just pay him.
Just pay him.
And it's been a roster in transition, right? They've transitioned away from a lot of players, but I mean, this is a superstar player. It's in their prime. That's not letting Eric Kendricks go. That's not letting Zadarius Smith go.
Do you think Justin Jefferson's the best receiver in the league?
If you ask me to put all the receivers in a bucket and I can pick one to start my offense with, I'm picking Justin Jefferson.
Ooh, really?
I'm surprised you think that's a surprising thing.
I don't. It's not that surprising. I think my guy has always been Tyreek Hill. I think he's a math changer. But other than Tyreek Hill, you did say all things considered, so you're considering age there.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill told us he's retiring at age 30. He's got 2 more seasons left,
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good point.
He's got some future ambitions that we won't get into here on this podcast.
So what makes this conversation really interesting, though, Joe, is you have potentially this waiting game happening between Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb, where I think you can make the argument, Joe, that over the last 27-ish games or so, CeeDee Lamb's been the best player, non-quarterback in football, period, let alone the best receiver. This guy has been, he's been outrageously good the last 10 games of 2022 and then all of last year. Do you think it's close? Is CeeDee Lamb and Jefferson close to you?
I think they're relatively close. I think I'd rather have Jefferson. And what I would say about CeeDee Lamb and what makes what he's been doing so impressive is there's no number 2, right? Like I respect Brandon Cooks. The ghost of whatever Michael Gallup is, but like there's not that much that's pulling attention away from CeeDee Lamb. The guy's just going out there. Everybody knows he's getting the football and he's making plays week in and week out. He's unbelievable. And so, yeah, it is. Is it that office meme where everybody's got the guns pointed at each other, just waiting to find out who's going to sign the next deal? And I think that's why you should give, like, in this conversation about all the deals that are coming, how about we give some kudos to Detroit and to Philadelphia for getting this stuff done and not putting themselves in this position now where you feel like there's going to be a standoff to see who's going to get the highest dollar amount.
The funny thing about that is I think Amon-Ra's contract, the terms came back. He got exactly $10,000 more than Tyreek Hill did on his extension.
Yeah.
So that was clearly Amon-Ra's.
$2,500. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like I want $10,000. I just want to be paid more than Tyreek Hill. That's all he wanted, and he got it. So AJ Brown's another one where I probably put him in that top guy conversation. I don't think I would with Amon-Ra though.
I really like Amon-Ra, and so this is where it gets fascinating to me. I think in this entire boom that we've been seeing with the wide receiver market, and it's absolutely happening. You've already outlined that for us. I wonder if these receivers are, number one, kind of like it's too fast and the teams are going to catch up and maybe are going to take like a money ball approach to the position. I think maybe you're already seeing that with some teams. But then I think you have to ask yourself this question. If you're going to pay a wide receiver north of 30 million or 30 million or whatever these big dollars are, right? And the NFL is a limited resource environment. There's opportunity costs to be mindful of. If you pay $30 million to a receiver, that's a lot of money that you can't spend elsewhere on your roster. You have to ask yourself this question: is this truly a transcendent player, or are they just really good in my scheme on my team with my quarterback? And I'm not saying that that's true for Amon-Ra St. Brown, but at 30-something million, do you at least ask yourself if Amon-Ra St. Brown played for a different team, would we be talking about him the same way? Or does Ben Johnson and Jared Goff get the most out of him?
Oh, you're making my head hurt because I think you're right. Like I don't think Amon-Ra is a transcendent player necessarily. I think he's a very good player, and I think he'd be productive on most teams. But would he be putting up 1,600 yards on every team? I don't think he would. He doesn't fundamentally change the way defenses have to play. And that's why I like Tyreek Hill as my top guy. That's why I think AJ Brown's up there. Cooper Kupp, Jeff, those guys fundamentally change the way you have to play. They can win literally any way. Where Amon-Ra's a little bit more pigeonholed into the Ben Johnson, Jared Goff connection. Again, he'd be productive anywhere. I just think they're maximizing what he does really well. So you're making me skittish on my team's wide receiver here now.
Well, look, we got to be real. We got to be real about it. And I think that's why it's important. We're talking about Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb. I feel very good about those guys I don't think it matters. Like, those guys are going to be dudes no matter what. And then you start working through this list, and, Brandon Aiyuk we're going to get to, T. Higgins we're going to get to. Do they fall into the same category? Or is Brandon Aiyuk, benefiting from being with Kyle Shanahan? I mean, obviously last season was really, really good. But for San Francisco, right now, they're like $38 million above the cap next year, looking at extensions, like expiring contracts with Charvarius Ward, Dre Greenlaw. Obviously, they got to get Purdy done. Aiyuk himself, Talanoa Hufanga. Like, they got so much money that they got to pay out. And that's why, like, when you consider this whole trade conversation and what would happen with Brandon Aiyuk, it kind of feels like they should probably hold on to that guy and maybe look at Deebo Samuel as the player to offload, even if the return wouldn't be as significant.
This is exactly what I've been saying since they drafted Ricky P. My guy, Ricky Pearsall, I've been saying, like, the interesting thing about Ricky P's skill set is he kind of does a little bit of what Aiyuk does, and he also does a little bit of what Deebo does. So it gives them options on how they can construct that wide receiver room. I would be offloading Deebo, though. He's on a big cap number. I think he has a balloon payment next year, right? Where I think he's like 14% of the cap or whatever. I would be looking to move on from him and keep Aiyuk. I think Aiyuk is more of that fundamental math changer where defenses really have to. I mean, you have to respect Deebo for sure, but that's as simple as putting guys by the line of scrimmage, Where Aiyuk, he's a 3-level threat. Awesome after the catch, legit route runner, all the separation data. I teased it last week with all the separation stuff we're doing. Aiyuk pops in just about any way, any lens you put on to look at that data. Aiyuk is at the very top of the list. So, I mean, he is an absolute monster to handle. I feel better with him moving forward. Plus, dude, you've got injury concerns with Deebo. He's shown up out of shape and overweight 2 camps in a row. I think the rumor was 240 pounds last year to start camp.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is, Jerome Bettis size. So not great. I'd be looking to move Deebo, but I think Aiyuk is probably for sure worth that. I would rank him above Amon-Ra St. Brown right now. I think I'd be more willing to give him the Amon-Ra contract than I was willing Amon-Ra.
You said last week that you think very highly of T. Higgins, and I do. Yeah. I do as well. I think T. Higgins is a really good football player, and we talked about this a little bit last week. In that the situation in Cincinnati honestly doesn't make any sense because they have cap space right now. They have $23 million in cap space. Keeping in mind that is factoring in the full salary franchise tag for T. Higgins. So, like, that's going to come down if they get an extension done.
Yeah,
they have gobs of money in 2025. They're $45 million. This is not a we don't have money to pay T. Higgins situation for Cincinnati. It's just how they do business, which is absolutely silly to me because you feel like this is an identity piece of your operation. I have no doubt in my mind that Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins is the type of big three that I can go on deep postseason runs with every single year. But for whatever reason, based on the way that Cincinnati does business, we're concerned about that long term. So, like, this should get done. And then the flip side of this is Cincinnati doesn't trade their players.
Right.
So are we living in a world where Cincinnati, forces Higgins to play this year and then he eventually walks? And that would to me be the ultimate doomsday scenario. But I feel the least good about this situation than the other ones that we've kind of discussed, because I do think that San Francisco is going to align with us and probably, okay, Aiyuk's our long-term play here. We might do something with Deebo. This Higgins stuff is really weird to me.
There's a whole other layer to this too, Joe, that we got to uncover. And that's, we both like T. Higgins. I think it's clear their identity of the offense is passing. Joe Burrow, receivers, yada, yada. I'm terrible at adages, but I'll get to that in a second. But T. Higgins is like he's a number 2 though. And so you've already laid the case that this is a limited resource environment. The NFL is. There is opportunity costs. Can you pay a wide receiver too, what T. Higgins is probably looking to get paid, which I'm assuming is more than Devontae Smith, or else I would think that deal might be done.
I would guess he wants more, but that was exactly where my mind went. You said, who's got the expensive quarterback and the two expensive receivers? Well, that's Philadelphia. Now, the way that they've structured those deals with void years,
Yes.
like it's all very staggered and very intentional to make that work. Cincinnati's not going to play ball like that.
And then they went and drafted Jermaine Burton too, Joe. So it's like, and he's not really a slot guy. He can play in the slot a little bit, but like, did they just tell you their intention?
Probably. But to me, that's not the way to do it. Like, you got a player like this that means so much to your operation. I don't know, if you're not in line, you're not in line, but then trade him. Then trade him.
It's hard to find receivers like T. Higgins too, especially in a league where the draft has not supplied many X-type receivers, big body guys that can get out there and run routes with elite body control. That's T. Higgins. Like, there's not anything he can't do. No route he can't run and be successful at. He's another one who pops in our separation data. So I would get this done if I were them for sure. It's almost like and I said I was terrible with adages, Joe. It's like they're cutting off their nose to spite their face. Did I say that right?
I've heard that before, and I never, honestly, like, if I can be candid, I never quite understood what people were trying to say with the cutting off the nose and the face and all this stuff, because I'm not doing any of that, you know?
Like, my point being, it's like they don't honor trade requests. So T. Higgins requesting a trade,
right.
But at the same time, they don't pay people. So it's like this double-sided stubbornness where they're not going to pay him, but they won't trade him. That doesn't hurt anybody but them. There's no pathway with those two train of thoughts that benefit the Cincinnati Bengals. And that's the part that's super weird about it to me.
Right. You would think that your approach would be, what's the best, like, if you're Duke Tobin, what's the best thing for the Cincinnati Bengals? Do that thing.
Yep.
The only thing you're doing the best thing for is Mike Brown's wallet.
Yep.
Like,
and principle.
Right. Like, the simplest explanation is always the truth. It's not the best thing for T. Higgins. It's not the best team for the actual, like, performance of your football team. Who does it actually benefit? Well, every arrow points right back at Mike Brown's wallet.
For sure. Doubling back on the wide receiver 1-2 thing, it's possible that this is getting held up too, because we haven't seen a team do this yet. The Eagles just did it, but they haven't played a game, with the roster constructed this way. I am curious if the Eagles go on to win the Super Bowl and they have a bunch of success this year, our team's going to fall in line and kind of try to do the same thing.
Well, the other side of that is Kansas City traded away Tyreek Hill and then won the next two Super Bowls. I understand that Patrick Mahomes is a very big deal there, and of course Travis Kelce is an elite tight end.
Yeah.
But they played Moneyball with receivers with Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Kadarius Toney and Rashee Rice, and it had good production in year one. I would question how much of that was just scheme, right? I don't know that, like, Rashee Rice was out there winning routes left and right. I thought they got him the ball, and he was able to turn and run quite a bit. Like, they had that Moneyball approach. You look at what the Packers have, and some people might say that the Packers have the deepest collection of young talent, like meaningful young talent at the position at wide receiver, and it's Christian Watson, a 2022 second-round pick, Jaden Reed, a 2023 second-round pick, Romeo Doubs, a 2022 fourth-round pick, and then Tavian Wicks, a 2023 fifth-round pick, with a couple of day two tight ends.
Yep.
Houston's kind of loading up on receivers, but, like, you are seeing both sides of this for good teams. You're seeing some good teams that are like, okay, we want all the receivers. We are seeing other teams that are like, nah, like, you can pay all the receivers. We'll just cast a wide net and we'll have wide receiver by committee.
All right, Joe, you mentioned the Buffalo Bills because they're taking a really interesting approach to receiver, and it's kind of counter what some of these other teams we talked about have been doing. Vets in volume, Curtis Samuel, Chase Claypool, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Mac Hollins.
Yeah.
And then they drafted a guy high still, 33rd pick in the draft, Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of Florida State. And then they have a 5th-round pick from 2 years ago, Khalil Shakir, a guy I liked way more than the draft day capital it cost to acquire him. So I think that's a positive. But, man, they have, 7 guys maybe? Do you include Justin Shorter in there, or is he done?
No, I think he's got an uphill climb.
Okay.
Don't forget, Shakir led this team in receiving the last 12 games of the season last year.
Yeah.
On 50 less targets than Diggs got. So like the yak, the down the field with Shakir is really good. And I think that when you consider Buffalo, you gotta factor in Dalton Kincaid. I think Dalton Kincaid's gonna get 120 targets this year at least for this football team. And so I think that they're obviously taking a different approach with Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator, kind of running this power spread, and they're going to share the ball. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Josh Allen responds to that, where for the last 4 years, it's been, okay, Diggs has got to eat, right? Like 150 targets to Diggs. Now it's not that, right? It's share the ball. It's, I think the entire approach for Josh Allen and how he reads the field and how he starts his progressions is going to be different. And is it going to work? I don't know. We're going to find out. But they're definitely taking a really different approach to this. But it also kind of very much aligns with what we saw from Kansas City. Can Josh Allen be that piece, right? But I don't know if it is Josh Allen. I think it's about the defense for Buffalo, right? I think their defense has to show up in those big moments. Great regular season defense, but when they play Kansas City or Cincinnati in the playoffs, they turn into a terrible defense. I think that's bigger than all of this, to be honest with you.
For sure. I've beat this point home with the sledgehammer too, Joe. And like when you have a quarterback like Josh Allen, who especially early on in his career struggled with that throw accuracy, getting a variety of guys around him that can separate, I think is such a big deal. I look at his breakout year. He had Steph Diggs, John Brown, Cole Beasley.
Yep.
All those guys win in certain ways, but they won with separation. I'm kind of looking at Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir as more of those type of guys that really make him feel comfortable. And then, Keon Coleman, I think, has potential to be a high-level separator. He's not quite there yet. But one thing he's really good at, especially comparative to like Gabe Davis, who that's the role he might be taking on, is running through space, like deep crossers, drag routes. Like if you ever watched Gabe Davis on a drag route, Joe, it's hilarious. He looks like a baby deer.
Bro, I'm not into Gabe Davis. like you want to talk about like resource allocation, 3 years, $39 million for Gabe Davis is insane to me. I can find any big bodied guy with some ball skills down the field that doesn't run fast, has a limited route tree, gives you nothing in terms of yak, and can block well. That's not $13 million a year to me.
Zero feel in zone coverage too, by the way. Like, which is crazy because the league's playing zone at like 70% clip rate right now. So,
which is interesting. The Bills faced the highest. I'm pretty sure they faced the highest percentage of man coverage of any team in the NFL last year.
They didn't have.
You wouldn't expect to be true, but you don't have any man. You didn't have any man beaters, right?
Yeah. So
hopefully,
Kincaid will be a man beater moving forward. Shakir for sure. Curtis Samuel, short part of the field. He reminds me a lot of Cole Beasley, but way better after the catch.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see. I'm actually excited to see Curtis Samuel in that offense. But you mentioned it now too with the Kansas City Chiefs. We mentioned it with Amon-Ra. There, even San Francisco to a degree. There's a degree where you can like scheme it up for guys at a high. Like we're seeing guys get schemed open more than ever before in NFL history. So at some point, it does fall on the offensive coordinator's shoulders, right, to manufacture some production. And then when you get down in the red area, you need your quarterback to be the dude, and that's what Mahomes does. That's what Josh Allen has done. He needs to do it maybe a few percentage points better, Joe, to get to the next level.
I think it's the defense, man. I think it's the defense.
It's the defense.
Yeah.
Well, when you have Josh Allen, you put a defense around him. You've taken a money ball approach at wide receiver. I'm curious to see if it works as good as it has for the Chiefs. The Chiefs are not going money ball anymore, though. They
gave a few bucks to Hollywood Brown, and they drafted Worthy in the first round. And I mean, is that comparable? But is that comparable to drafting Keon Coleman and signing Curtis Samuel? I mean, that's not that far off in terms of what the resource allocation is for those players.
It's comparable, but I'm looking at probably the last 4 years. I don't know that they ever wanted to actually be a money ball approach at wide receiver. If you look at, they drafted Sky Moore in the second round. They traded a 3 for Kadarius Toney. Yeah. They drafted Rashee Rice in the second round. They signed Valdez-Scantling to a relatively big contract. They brought in Juju Smith-Schuster. Like, I feel like all those guys are kind of names. Well, Valdez, especially when he was coming from Green Bay, he was a bigger name than he is probably right now. And a lot of draft capital, like a surprising amount of draft capital for what it's yielded. Now Worthy in the first round. It seems like, though, they've definitely gotten sick of having to, scratch and claw every single drive, because that's what it's been in Kansas City the last couple of years. Like,
and their defense is so situationally good as well.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's such an important layer. And there's been some real blunders on special teams on the other side of it for Kansas City that's been very helpful for them in their last 2 Super Bowl wins, if we're being honest. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it is the players, like, but it's the situational execution that's just as important. I mean, if Aaron Sipros doesn't line drive that punt, because Kansas City beat Philadelphia. Of course, we saw the special teams blunders this past year against San Francisco. Go back to the Bengals AFC Championship game 2 years ago. Kansas City doesn't win that game without the special teams blunders of Cincinnati. So, like,
right.
I don't know. You know, it's that's why a lot of my team building philosophy in the NFL is be as good as you can for as long as you can and hope to get lucky. Like, there's an element of luck that we're uncomfortable discussing that's absolutely true for every single team that's ever won the Super Bowl. And you got to be on the right side of it.
True. All right, so to tie a bow on the wide receiver conversation, we are very pro paying the top dudes what they're worth. I think you would agree with that, right? Supporting your quarterback, getting him those top guys, they're valuable. There is a breaking point, though, where if you don't have one, don't try to cobble it together and probably try that Moneyball approach. I think that's the way to do it. We've seen teams have more success doing that than we've ever seen them have paying 2 receivers, and we'll find out this year what that's all about. So,